L'ho vista per la prima volta mentre camminava sulla spiaggia. Aveva gli occhi come il mare, infiniti, come un orizzonte. Io non ricordo cosa ma da quel momento non riuscii più a pensare ad altro. Ogni viso che incontravo, ogni gesto che osservavo, ogni parola che pronunciavo, mi ricordavano lei. Non sapevo come fare a incontrarla di nuovo. Avevo più speranza che coraggio nelle mie tasche e, senza volerlo, cominciai a cercarla. La vedevo dentro i giorni che mi vivevano, mentre alimentavo una passione. Pensavo a lei quando il vino scendeva ad accendere i sorrisi degli amici, seduti al sole della riviera, dove il Friuli va a riposare gli occhi nei suoi tramonti. La vedevo continuamente davanti a me, in ogni luogo, fin dentro la fine. E quando immaginavo come sarebbe stato averla lì, con me,
Perfetto, buon pomeriggio a tutti e a tutte. Benvenuti a questa degustazione. Io sono Paolo Porfidio.
My name is Paolo Porfidio, enologist, sommelier, and wine communicator in every shape and form and color. With us today is Stefano Trinco, a winemaker, enologist, and president of the FRIULI, the designation. We'll be dealing with the Friuli Venezia Giulia from every point of view, in every respect. We'll try to provide a perspective that will summarize this terroir, which is as complex as compelling. Now, in front of you, you find as many as 8 glasses that are going to be filled with different colors and different varietals. So just yesterday, as we were opening the Milan Wine Week, we dealt with the important topic of the pandemic changes in wine consumption, and especially the changes that have occurred in the best restaurants wine list. And we dealt with the fact that Venezia Giulia in particular, and then as second, found increasingly more space in the wine list, accommodating the domestic and international varietals that in these regions. I'll now leave the floor to the President. I'd like to thank you all for being here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this tasting devoted to the Friuli designation. The Friuli designation is the latest among the designations of origin of Friuli Venezia Giulia that sort of maps across the smaller designations. So it is like a second designation, which is common to all the designations of Friuli Venezia Giulia. It was established only 6 years ago, so it's relatively recent, and it meant, in particular, to give all producers an opportunity to bottle their wines under a common name. That would be the same for all the areas of origin, no matter where they are in the territory of Friuli, whether from near Trieste, Gorizia, Pordenone. It can be called Friuli. So it's a regional as well as territorial dog. Our greatest writer, Ippolito Nievo, a great author, in his Confessions of an Italian, wrote that Friuli Venezia Giulia is a representation of the universe. In just a few miles, you can travel from the mountains to the sea. And as you can tell from the pictures, that also holds true for the wines. So you have different wines for different production areas. We have several areas, approximately 10 DOCs with different characteristics. You all heard about the Coglio and Colle Vitale with the unique soils rich in marl, and the typical fleece that are very loose, like the ponca, very different from what you find at a short distance in the valley bottoms, in the plains, where the zonzo intagliamento flow, the zonzo and gra designations, very permeable soils that are suitable for agriculture. Then you have 3 areas along the sea, the most important being Aquileia, where the viticulture of Friuli was first started, because the Romans of Aquileia were the founders of Venice. So there is a great viticultural tradition that then reached the eastern hills of Friuli with very thick and heavy soils. And then to close the Carso designation, just inland from Trieste. It's a very difficult viticulture that is required there because of the harshness of the environment on the karst, but vineyards also with a wonderful view, very generous in terms of the grapes it provides, the quality of the grapes. We also have two regional DOCs, one the Prosecco. Prosecco is named after the village of Prosecco, just inland from Trieste, which has been protected its geographical name, which is inimitable the world over. The second interregional designation is the Pinot Gris, which accounts for 25% as a varietal of the regional surface area. The Friuli designation is in it overlaps each and every one designations, and so it's a blend of everything that we are growing in Friuli. It accounts for approximately 10% of the production. When you talk about Friuli, you are talking about white grapes more than red grapes. So in the last 10 years, there has been a considerable shift towards white varietals, and especially aromatic ones. And so viticulture slowly but steadily has changed and adapted. Also, and sometimes despite the Prosecco boom, which also made its effects felt in our region. The varietals that are grown in our region are here. Here are the most important indigenous or varieties, the Tokai Friulano or Friulano, as it is mentioned on the labels, which is by far the most indigenous, and maybe in the course of the tasting we'll talk more extensively about it. And then Verduzzo, Malvasia istriana, which we consider as an indigenous varietal. Among the most prevalent red indigenous grapes is Refosco dal Peduncolo Rosso, the red that is a Refosco. The rest of the full surface area is planted with locturnus varieties. The vineyards in Friuli spread only after 1960. It was a major investment on the part of the regional authority of Friuli, because viticulture was not part of the farming tradition of Friuli. As we tried to improve the indigenous variety, we also strived to import the best suited international varietals that would be best adapted to the area. Chardonnay, white grape, Pinot, Riesling, Sauvignon, the Gewürztraminer, and then also among the Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Merlot, and Pinot Noir. So the varietals sort of expanded. In Friuli, we have also the most prominent nursery of all of Italy, the Rauscedo nurseries. And a lot of research goes on there, and it is immediately applied to our vineyard with the results that are pretty positive. This will be an important tasting, very diverse. be a presentation of this first outing, let's call it this way, as a consortium. We've also been granted very recently the authorization to protect and promote the designation. As you have seen, this is a difficult a difficult region, a challenging one. And if we were to characterize this area and define it in just one word, heterogeneity, diversity. And diversity begins with the climate. Mediterranean climate along the coast and in the flatlands, and then a continental climate on the hills, and all the way to an alpine climate at higher elevations. We have different soils also. The Ponca on the hills, which is called Opoka in nearby Slovenia, and then the alluvial soils, gravel and stone rocks. And today we're to visit the area across the flight, and we'll discover a huge diversity that enhances the value. And there's also diversity, not just of soils and climates, but also the interactions of the individual varietals, such as the national varietals that coexist side by side with indigenous varietals. We're being served the first wine today, this Ribolla Gialla that was using a Charmat methodology that is part of the FRIULI DOC rulebook. This is Ribolla Gialla, one of the most representative indigenous varieties of FRIULI or Friul. This variety is named after its fermentation, also because of the high concentrations of malic acid of this varietal during fermentation. This varietal would give rise to particularly intense fermentations that would look like boiling, hence ribolla. So in this case, it's a long Charmat that we are proposing to use. So it's a sparkling wine. Now, to say more about Ribolla Gialla, it's the varietal that has encountered the best performance in recent years, and several vineyards were planted because its aptitude to be made into a spumante seems to be very appreciated by the market. So many have started planting Ribolla Gialla with the goal of using bubblies. Bubblies are becoming increasingly prevalent and also in the form of alternatives to Prosecco. And in our area, we've started making our first sparkling wines and improved the quality. And we improved the quality of the final product a good deal. Now, when you talk about Friul and the origin of the name of Ribolla, Ribolla is the boiling wine, while Schioppettino is the boiling red. Schioppettino, too, is named after the fermentation. Schioppettino meaning popping. In the spring, during lactic fermentation, it would pop, and it's the same etymology if you think of it as Ribolla Gialla. The winery we're presenting today is one that is base is located in the plains, and so it has soil go from gravel to heavy clay soils. The winery owns approximately 15 hectares, and they've started making spumantes out of their Ribolla grapes. This is Avril in Brut style. Avril is the month of April. It is a reference to spring, and it brings out the white flowers and fresh flowers that you will find in the glass with the peach notes, the peach highlights that are found in the glass that make this wine very fitting. In this spumante version, it takes at least 90 days of contact with fine liquor, and you discover the entire aromatic complexity. As the nose announced, the palette too is based on many floral hints and peaches, accompanied by great acidity, great freshness that encourages the next sip, and is in reference to the soils, the alluvial soils rich in gravel, rich in rocks and pebbles that will be the origin of the saltiness class. This wine is very sapid, and this is a characteristic of the wineries that grow their grapes in these soils. There are many wineries in this area, and increasingly striving to improve their quality as well as sustainability. Environmental sustainability is very important, and in particular in FRIULI, if you roam around the countryside, find great representations of what is being done to encourage sustainability. Now, what you're saying will be very well and very effectively represented by some wines, especially those that are organically. Sustainability is important to anyone, including us in FRIULI. That translates in reduction in the use of pesticides and agrochemicals in the vineyards, and also the idea of biodiversity in the pollinators. So is really taking us towards absolute quality, and that begins with Ribolla, because Ribolla, being among the latest varietals planted here and accounting for most of the new vineyards, there's an attempt to make Ribolla and all the new vineyards sustainable. This wine is totally in line with the philosophy of the winery. It's got a fine bead and a delicate nose, a very straight and acidic palate, which is the definition of Ribolla Gialla to us. The acidity of Ribolla Gialla is well known, and it's important to stay in with the characteristic. Absolutely, this great acidity is also amplified by the CO2, the carbon dioxide that persists in the palate, also to some lengths, and also highlights the saltiness of the wine, its minerality, and it encourages the next sip and the options for pairing. And we feel that this wine would go well on the entire meal. Okay, let's move on from Ribolla Gialla to another varietal, perhaps the varietal par excellence of Friuli, the Tokai Friulano, which can only be called by law Friulano, following the controversy with Hungary in 2007, which stripped the Italians of the possibility of calling this Tokai, although in the National Registry it is still referred to as a Tokai Friulano. This varietal is reminiscent of Sauvignonas and Sauvignon Fer, so much so that in some areas of Slovenia, in the Brda, it is referred to as Sauvignonas or Sauvignon Verde, that is of Bordeaux origins, although certain theories associated to the Hungarian origins and the name of Furmint, which is also echoed in the name of certain wine families such as Furmint. Now, this is a varietal that is everywhere in all the viticultural areas, the seaside, the plains, the hills. To us, this is always our flagship wine, the most important wine. This Querelle has made it even more dear to us. The name is now Friulano, And to counter what the Hungarians were saying, we've had to study the origin of the name in depth. We've always looked westwards, and on the contrary, it was a Sauvignonas. We realized that the producers of the Berda apply to it on the side of the border. It's a very versatile vineyard. You know that the Tokais, sorry, I keep talking it to Tokai, that the Friulanos that are produced in the eastern area of the hills are different from the Tokais of the plains or of the coast, but they have two lines in common. One is on the olfactory level, this note of white flowers and almonds especially, that make us go back to its origins, and then this note that you make or not, and that leads to a bitterish finish that is very pleasant, characteristic, which is associated with the pH of the fruit, which is slightly higher. Now, this is one of the most special samples of this wine, because this is one of the most important areas. The winery in this case is marketing the wine as FRIULI, but it is based in the Orientali, that is the Eastern Hills, but it believes that the name should remain, and hence it markets it as DOC FRIULI, Friulano. And the Friulans believe believe also in the medicinal properties of Tokai or Friulano, because they say Tokai all ills go away. And that's a funny way of talking about good food and good wine. Now let's talk about this particular Friulano. Look at the color. It is pretty deep.
Un leggero contatto di qualche giorno sulle fecce fini.
Also comes from some days spent in contact with the fine leaves that provide some additional aromatics, with the fruit combined with the almond notes that are rich and that will veer to flower, and will end up in balsamic complexity that makes you think of wild mint.
Sfocia anche, se vogliamo, in leggere note, passatemi il termine, frizzanti, agrumate.
And a few citrusy notes. Now, that's all in the glass.
E ritroviamo questa grande persistenza, questa grande prima di tutto
which offers this persistence, this freshness, which is typical of Friulano. Goes hand in hand with the aromatic complexity. We'll rediscover the flower highlights with the almond towards the finish. And as with the previous wine, it's not just the acidity that persists, but also the and the minerality, the saltiness. The saltiness is back again, accompanied by the balsamic flavors and freshness to the palate. That's a great example of Tokai, with a major correspondence between the olfaction and the taste, because of its freshness combined with this almond note. It will finish on the palate like a candy almost. It's very, very special and very, very good. It's a very nice example of a Tokai. It is representative of the bar, by all means. Let's continue. Wine number 3 is Malvasia Istriana. This has become an indigenous varietal. There are many possible variations, especially on the Colli Valley, the Eastern Hill range, in the area of the Zonzo. So you have a number of variations. In this case, this is a very clean, clear-cut version, very limpid and with a color that is dictated by short time spent on the fine leaves, and then the typical nose of Malvasia. This is Malvasia istriana, which is part of the family of Malvasia that encompasses as many as 17 varietals in Italy.
Note spiccatamente profumate di appunto frutta fresca che poi virano anche qua in
fresh fruit that turns into some spices and floral hue. It's a bit more intriguing than by Friulano, and then more and more spice, especially
delle note leggermente di vaniglia, leggermente un po' più
vanilla,
dettate qui
and also more evolutionary notes come from this longer contact with this is an excellent example. Malvasia istriana, together with Ribolla Gialla, is one of the most fashionable varieties, which is finding a prominent place in Friuli, especially in the areas that are best suited for its cultivation, namely the hills and the areas in close proximity with the heavy and tight textured soils. Because that's an excellent example. It's the Istrian Malvasia that grows in Istria, where there's a lot of minerality. Our Malvasias need to be molded after that, so candies and pear drops to the palate. We're trying to use traditional production methods, very rigorous macerations, bring out the clear olfactory notes while leaving to the palate sweetness with some spice to it. Although it was never placed in oak. This is a wine that is being repositioned on the markets in the best possible way, using the best technologies to bring out its typicity. Although it's always been there, it had been neglected for some time. This typicity is particularly evident on the palate. If you taste it, there's fruit, flowers, but also the prominent spice that would suggest time spent in oak. Also, coffee grains and roasted highlights that provides a good representation of the interest of this area, especially when combined with the minerality, which is more structured, close to being crisp in this extreme Malvasia. So it's even more elegant than the Friulano, more elegance, more structure. This is one of the symbolical wineries of the Isonzo designation, young winemakers at Borgo Trevisan, although they are the heirs to the farmer tradition that ran in their families. They wanted to improve their techniques and technologies, trying the best qualities of Malvasia istriana case. Let me dwell on the sensory notes. Very velvety acidity, very enveloping acidity. This doesn't take malolactic fermentation. So in the management of the acidity, you can see how that can have an impact on the mouthfeel, on the sensory, tactile qualities of the wine in the mouth. So this is a very, very interesting example of Malvasia. Let's move on. We'll be comparing different samples of an international varietal, Sauvignon. In Friuli, Sauvignon has a very prominent place, especially in the most important wine lists. There's a high concentration of Italian Sauvignons, especially from Friuli, because in Friuli they were capable of interpreting Sauvignon depending on its and based on this variety of terroirs, bringing out very distinctive yet different characteristics every time. Indeed, to us, Sauvignon is the most important international varietal from the point of view of quality. We really cherish your Sauvignon in every variation, and actually in an international competition. In the international competitions, the Sauvignons of Friuli Venezia Giulia always well positioned in the final ranking. Again, we have worked hard with Shadow Nurseries to develop the best clones, especially the R3 that you all know about, which is one of the most expressive in terms of nose of Sauvignon nose. And also in applying different vinification techniques. You know that Sauvignon has a range of aromas that are very changing and that depend a lot on the time of the when you pick the grapes. So the big difference is made on the date of harvesting. Those who want pyrosine aromas, pyrosine-like aromas, will harvest very early, even before the date that you would pick to make a sparkling wine, while others seem to prefer ripe fruit, tropical fruit, and when that is the case, that is the last is the last wine variety to be harvested, and others still are harvesting at different points in time and blending the wines to get an interesting result. Now, when you meet a producer, the first question is how did the harvest go, and the second question is what is your Sauvignon like this year? So that does not tells you as to the fact that the final result does not really depend on alone, but also on not on winemaking alone, but most of it comes from nature. So you can make decisions about Sauvignon to harvest it sooner or later, and then you need to adapt to what the vintage year is providing, what the harvest year is providing, and then you will create your own Sauvignon. Two of the three Sauvignons flighted today show that there's a huge difference between these wines that does not from the winery choices made, but also from the soil and climate. The first Sauvignon comes from the Laguna area of Friuli Latisia, which is represented in the map on your tables. It's the red part, and it is very close to the sea, and therefore it grows in these soils. Sauvignon on these soils brings out a lot of expression, quality, and opulence. It is very lush to the palate, so you can expect this kind of texture, and the product at hand totally reflects. About sustainability, there are a few people who are also processing their wines in an organic way, and the first wine that we are tasting is an organic wine, and it is in line with the requirements for organic wines, with very, very few sulfates. And despite everything, we've been able to preserve the nose entirely, because it would be very sensitive and easily disappear. You can detect a lot of in this glass, and it's an excellent example of Sauvignon Friuli. Yes, indeed, absolutely.
Sentite subito questi profumi, profumi che
You can immediately tell the nose that is very varietal. You recognize Sauvignon, pyrazine, nuances, the tomato leaves, the sage leaves. It is a balsamic again with iodine combined with it. We are approximately 16 kilometers from the beach. And so that's all easy to perceive on the nose. To the palate, you discover this great acidity and freshness, these soft, almost velvety pyrazines that will fill the palate once again, in combination this time with a lot of sea salt, and accompanied by great acidity is the result of this terroir and these soils. In also wines, especially the ones in our flight today, there's a close connection with soils. Giacomo Takis, the great enologist, said that to make a great wine, you need to find in the glass the terroir, the vintage, the varietal, and the hand of the winemaker. And in this glass, we find it all. The fermentation method, the production method is there. It's organic, and then the proximity to the sea, the soils that impart this great freshness and acidity, and of course, Sauvignon Blanc in all its freshness and greatness and exuberance as well.
Proseguiamo poi con il secondo vino in degustazione, che è di una cantina che sicuramente...
Next wine. This is not a new winery to wine lovers, because this is the wine that we're tasting today in the 2021 version, but in 2019 it was proclaimed Best Sauvignon in the global contest in Brussels.
Perfetto, quindi il Sauvignon della cantina.
So the Sauvignon from Pitars. We're on the right bank of the Tagliamento River with pebbly grounds and gravelly soils, known as the Grave of Friuli. Very often, look at the soil composition, we feel very proud because the Grave of Friuli are very similar to the Grave of France. The soils are the same, very nutrient poor grounds that are very well suited to high quality viticulture. The poorer the soil, the richest the vine. And so it's a perfect and painstaking management of the vineyards out surprising results, astonishing results. Now this in particular is confirming year in, year out the quality of their Sauvignons. It is Sauvignon that is like a punch. It will leave, you can't expect the type of aromas from a technical standpoint. This is largely based on thiols instead of pyrazines. Totally different, but that's the beauty of Sauvignon. It's very versatile as a varietal. In this case, this Sauvignon is much more ample, complex, if you will, less intense. If we want to refer to intensity, but again, we find a different note. The tomato leaf is less and less perceptible, while the floral, fruit, and citrusy notes tend to prevail. They're taking over. This great complexity that also stems from the very low yield that provide a good level of concentration in terms of aroma, polyphenols, color. You see that the color is much more concentrated than in the previous sample. Peaches, lychees, peach blossom. These are very prominent aromas that make this product truly unique. So you could help me on this one. Perhaps the one thing that we could say is that it is a beautiful wine, but harder to pair. Well, certainly it would be harder to find the right food pairings with this wine, but the great saltiness and acidity of the wines of this area always make it for excellent pairings with local dishes, including the very tasty dishes of Friuli, the ones from cold cuts, including the prosciutto or ham of San Daniele, the raw ham, and then others products, asparagus and herbs, because in this Sauvignon there is a very effective expression of vegetal characters. It's a very important wine, and to me it's really top quality Sauvignon. I'm happy as the DOC of Friuli and in my capacity as president of the consortium to have wonderful products, and is absolutely a flagship jewel of the crown of production of Friuli. But pairings, I think that playing around with certain wines, and like a wine of this type, if you change the temperatures, you can make it more amenable to many different pairings. Now, when it's cold, it's the saltiness that prevails, while when it's slightly warmer, it's smoother and more aromatic. And so you can think of temperature when you pair it. Let's go to a totally different terroir, to the east, in the Colli Orientali, in the area of Aquileia, the most historical area of winemaking. Although when talking about Friuli, the historical nature is like a mild. Of course, viticulture had always been there since before Christ. And then Tokai was here in the 1300s. But the Friuli designation and quality products were absolutely not a time-honored tradition. So at the viticultural level, as well as the French varietals were added in the 19th century, especially after Baron Villaruzzi married a Frenchman who moved in. If you know Villaruzzi, you will know that top quality products, Merlot de la Tour and their Chardonnays are always excellent. And it began there. That is where the of the French varietals spread from. And then after the 1960s, the international varietals spread more and more, to the extent that we believe that Sauvignon is almost an indigenous varietal. So our areas are ideal for these varietals, and they give their best on the hills, but also in the flatlands. So if consider this is a truly different Sauvignon. Now, the first Sauvignon was about freshness and finesse. The second was about exuberance. In this third sample that we're tasting now, there's a lot of elegance. It's very complex, austere, and at the same time elegant. I think it is closer to French Sauvignons with clear-cut fruity notes and also green notes. To me, there's a lot of asparagus, those accompanied by bay and sage. It's very balsamic and at the same time fresh and austere, very elegant. It's a very international Sauvignon because asparagus can be a negative descriptor in most cases to us. So we know that asparagus is present in Sauvignons in many prominent regions. So probably these clones are French origin, closer to and the Loire area. With more structure, style, and elegance. This is yet another great example of how Sauvignon can be used. A lot of elegance, structure, and balance that is also detected on the palate. And then in the previous samples, there's a very noticeable saltiness that is engaging, almost crisp, accompanied by the green notes, the fruity notes, this time really with a very nice, enjoyable persistence. I think that this Sauvignon is really a great representation, an uncommon representation of a Friuli, because we're talking about another clone, a different clone. But I think it is very representative and interesting in terms of the varietal, the grape variety. So you can think of many food pairings. So as you can, it's the same area, same region, 3 different regions of Sauvignon Blanc. All of them can find a space of its in a wine list and encourage different food pairings. So you may want to order a great Sauvignon, but it's important to understand where from, from what soils, who makes it. You see, in lovers, we take it for granted, but in communications, there's a lot we still need to convey about the various terroirs and in enhancing the interest of the diversity that can exist within a few dozen kilometers. This makes you think of the great diversity that the soil can impart, that the various terroirs can impart. So this is what makes wine fascinating and has always made wine fascinating. The reason why we in love with industry, with the wine universe, because of the diversity it can provide. Just a few kilometers will transform one product into another. So the vintage. And all these wines were all made in 2021. And just like for the rest of Italy, 2021 has been remembered as the vintage of the century, and hopefully there will be more to follow. This was fantastic from a quality perspective. Excellent grapes that ripened at the right time. The harvest operations began the first week of September and ended at the beginning of October. So everything went followed an ideal pattern. The last 20 days, from mid-August on, there was another alternation of cool, warm days, which worked perfectly for the nose, for the bouquet. And you can tell all these minor changes in any glass of Sauvignon. So a further choice was the producer's choice on how to process the grapes in addition to everything else. So this is 2021, this is 2020. The previous 2 were from 2021. My apologies. And it's important to mention change, that the change in vintage year also is shown through the color. Where it, for nothing else, you can tell it's 1 year older. From the point of view of the tasting instead, in terms of acidity, freshness, the evolution is evidently different, but it is dictated by the varietal itself. There are no signs of oxidization. And to me, it was interesting to propose a Sauvignon that was 1 year older than the others to highlight the capacity that this varietal has to age well. Longevity is associated with Chardonnay, more Sauvignon, but certain Sauvignons improve over time. And so releasing a Sauvignon like this now is a good representation of what it can be if you allow it to age. Of course, Sauvignon in the right areas. Let's go back to the indigenous varietals. Let's immediately stick the nose in the next glass. No doubt this is a Gewürztraminer or aromatic Traminer. Now, many of us are accustomed to enjoying Traminers, not in the Friuli, but associated with the Gewürztraminer of South Tyrol or Upper Adige. But the versions like today's Traminer from Friuli will show that there can be smoother variations that are more about the aromatics than the acidity. It's very complex and delicate. Traminer is one of those varieties that were made indigenous after many years of planting in the area. It is grown a bit everywhere in the region, but the best expressions come from the heavy soils, clay-rich soils, in the area of the Aquileia designation. That's where it gives its very best in terms of structure. The aromatic Traminer, with aromatics, are pretty full aromas that are reminiscent of roses, show that Traminer is excellent here. And there's something more in this Traminer which is associated to the slight ripening. So there are a few additional aromas in this. And also the contact before vinification, the contact with the skins. You see there's a bit more action. You can tell it's very thick aromas. So you recognize the typicity of Gewürztraminer, but also these very enjoyable, softer, smoother, smoothed out notes, which are absolutely what you mentioned, not just the lychee, fruit and roses, but also veer, white fruit, especially ripe, is much smoother compared to the variations we're accustomed to from Alto Adige. It's a very nice example of Traminer, which tend to be much more straight than this. This is very intriguing because it prompts you to smell it again and again and again to understand what you are smelling. It could be roses, white fruit, peaches. It is really and complex and with a high alcohol proportion. It is a nice example of a Traminer. Obviously, it lacks the characteristics of the typical Trentino Gewürztraminer, but totally reflects what a Traminer, the aromatic Traminer of Friuli can be. The alcohol is well integrated to the palate, and the freshness supports the alcohol very effectively. I think there's a lot of extraction despite the short skin contact. The skin contact makes this wine chewable. It's rich, it's full. It's almost chewing grade, and this is very interesting also because it and if you dwell on it towards the finish, you will recognize the length of the salt in the wine. So minerality is back again, and also the territorial characteristics of the wines is back again. Associated with aromatic wine, where the minerality tends to prevail, the aromatics associated with fruit is not prevailing here. It's the saltiness that is very evident despite the skin contact and the overripe grapes. So it's very well done. So that shows how the wines of the sea are typically better structured. So think of the Friuli from the area or the Colli Orientali, while the aromatics and the the moderate alcohol content come from the Greve and Isonzo. This is in demand currently from the market that doesn't really want a lot of structure. So we can really are passionate consumers with whatever wine they might like. We're always providing what like well. The last sample is a red wine. As you can tell, reds are outnumbered by white. This varietal is also very interesting. It's an indigenous varietal called Refosco dal Peduncolo Rosso, the red pedicel Refosco, which has a special place in Friuli, and I would like to make known in the red of the market. You're going to taste this wine, and it's often underestimated. It has a lot of finesse. It compared in the 19th century by Count Berg to the Burgundy Pinots. Of course, this is not of the Refosco, but is more inclined from an graphical point of view towards what other varietals do, such as Grenache, Primitivo, and Pinot Noir. What applies to Friulano also applies to Refosco among reds. It's our indigenous varietals, the varietal of our heart. There are various clones in the area. The one that we know best is the Refosco dal Peduncolo Rosso, the smoothest of them all, the one that is really the best appreciated by consumers, but Refoscone on the Colli Orientali, which has very big berries and has a lot of acidity. It is a brother to the Terrano, the Refosco Vistri, which is grown on the karst, a very hard wine, and it is appreciated the way it is with this very pronounced astringency, and it is characteristic. In the general cultivation of, in the general vineyard landscape of Friuli, Refosco dal Peduncolo Rosso is the prevalent varietal, and it starts out from the area of Aquileia, which is the historic cradle of viticulture in Friuli, and which is still the most active area. The Professor Chiozza in Scodova, close to Aquileia, had started studies long ago on Refosco and ended up selecting various types of Refosco. He was a great Louis Pasteur's, so Pasteur would come to Scodovacca in Cervignano near Aquileia, and he studied the grapes with his Italian friend. So in the genetics of Refosco, Louis Pasteur also had a role, and we pride ourselves in this. As for the rest, this wine has a beautiful color. It can be lively, but it's still quite a harsh wine. It's hard for us from Friuli to lose our inner heart, and the same with our wines. We can be sweet, we can be gentle, but there's something hard in us deep inside. And so it has tannins that require a lot of maturation. It has to ripen in the sun and the wine needs to spend a long time in the oak for it to become better blended and smooth out. But the tannins and the hardness of the wine is only detectable in the palate, because when you just look at it with this nice ruby color, a delicate color with this nice transparency, and then you bring the glass to the nose and you detect these fresh notes, the roses, the violets. This all makes us to other viticultural areas. Again, a lot of balsamic notes from the soil, but when you taste it, you discover the tannins. Tannins, in this case, the Collavini winery managed to smooth these out. Certainly, 1 or 2 extra years of aging would help, but it's not easy to manage the tannins in Refosco del Peduncolo Rosso. This is a real-life example of how a very attentive management engineered with thinning out, leaf removal, and perfect management has brought these Refosco bunches to perfect maturity. And also, makers did a lot in imparting it a lot of smoothness, also through the very accurate use of oak, combining in a very elegant way the color, the primary aromas and the tertiary aromas that come from the aging in oak. This is a great example of the potential of Refosco. Sometimes it be less graceful, but think of this as a remarkable outcome that tells a story about the potential of these red wines, think of what Grenache could be. Grenache also being part of the family. This is a red that goes well with pairings. If you serve it around 15 to 16 degrees, it could be a good match for some fish dishes such as is the tradition in Friuli. While warmer, it pairs with other foods from the area. To me, it's a good match for meat, but certainly some fish dishes would also work well with it. So it's truly a great product. So you've seen, I think, today a good representation, certainly not an exhaustive one, but a good beginning to learn about Friuli. It's an encouragement as well to visit Friuli and discover its great diversity in natural terms, in terms of production, because Friuli really in recent years has really improved its quality. And as you can see here, it is very well represented in this flight. It would be a good idea to just leave one day and spend a weekend in Friuli. You might find excellent things. There are cities with a lot of history behind them, modern wineries and modern estates, very, very modern, an attractiveness for wine tourism, and also a capacity to accommodate it. So we've got everything it takes, and also from a technical standpoint, everything is in perfect order. Last but not least, the quality of the product. I'd like to thank you for attending and being so patient. Hopefully, the tasting was interesting to you. This is a representation of the wine panorama, the wine landscape of Friuli. Our expectation is that you will be made curious about what Friuli is all about. So that's our final message. Thank you all. If you have any questions, feel free to